I never thought I'd be one of those people who believed in the supernatural. Ghosts, ghouls, and zombies were all just figments of imagination, confined to horror movies and creepy campfire stories. But now, I can't deny the chilling reality that has become my life. It started innocuously enough. I moved to a small town nestled in the heart of nowhere, seeking solitude and a fresh start. The town was quaint, almost idyllic, with its picturesque houses and friendly residents. I rented a modest cabin on the outskirts, surrounded by dense woods that offered a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. The first few nights were uneventful, filled with the sounds of crickets and the occasional hoot of an owl. But on the fifth night, something changed. I was jolted awake by a noise outside my window. A slow scraping sound like nails against glass. My heart pounded as I sat up, straining to hear more. The noise stopped, replaced by an eerie silence that was even more unsettling. I tried to brush it off as a raccoon or some other nocturnal animal, but sleep eluded me for the rest of the night. The next day, I found scratch marks on the window pane, deep, jagged grooves that didn't look like they were made by any animal I knew of. A shiver ran down my spine, but I convinced myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. That night, I locked all the doors and windows, feeling a creeping sense of unease. I lay in bed, eyes wide open, listening to the silence that enveloped the cabin. It felt oppressive, suffocating. Just as I was about to drift off, the scraping sound started again, this time louder and more insistent. My breath caught in my throat as I realized it was coming from the back door. I crept out of bed, grabbing a flashlight from my bedside table. My hands trembled as I made my way to the door, the scraping growing more frantic with each step. When I reached the door, I paused, my heart hammering in my chest. I didn't want to open it, but I had to know what was out there. Taking a deep breath, I flung the door open and shined the flashlight into the darkness. The beam cut through the night, revealing nothing but trees and shadows. I felt a momentary relief, thinking it was all in my head. But then I saw it. A figure standing at the edge of the woods, barely visible in the dim light. It was tall and gaunt, with pale, rotting skin that clung to its bones. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and its mouth hung open in a grotesque grin. For a moment, I was paralyzed with fear, unable to move or scream. Then it took a step towards me, and I slammed the door shut, locking it with trembling hands. I spent the rest of the night huddled in a corner, clutching the flashlight like a lifeline. The scraping continued for hours, relentless and maddening. When dawn finally broke, the noise stopped, and I dared to peek outside. The figure was gone, leaving only a trail of dead leaves and an overwhelming sense of dread. I knew then that my life would never be the same. The zombie was real, and it was coming for me. I spent the next day in a haze, my mind replaying the events of the previous night over and over again. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the wind outside sent my heart racing. I couldn't shake the image of the zombie from my mind, its ghastly appearance, the way it moved with a slow, deliberate menace. By evening, I was on edge, jumping at shadows and flinching at the slightest noise. I tried to convince myself that I was overreacting, that it had all been a vivid nightmare. But deep down, I knew the truth. I had seen it with my own eyes, and it was real. As the sun began to set, my anxiety grew. I couldn't bear the thought of another night of terror, so I decided to take action. I barricaded the doors and windows with whatever I could find: furniture, wooden planks, anything that might keep the creature out. I knew it wouldn't be enough, but it gave me a small sense of security. Night fell, and with it came the oppressive silence. I sat in the living room, clutching a baseball bat and staring at the front door, waiting for the inevitable. Hours passed, each minute stretching into an eternity. My eyes grew heavy, but I fought to stay awake. Just as I was about to succumb to exhaustion, the familiar scraping sound echoed through the cabin. My heart leaped into my throat as I realized it was coming from the back door again. I tightened my grip on the bat, my knuckles white, and crept towards the noise. The scraping grew louder, more insistent as I approached the door. I could see the wood splintering under the force of whatever was outside. I steeled myself, knowing I had to confront it. Taking a deep breath, I yanked the door open and swung the bat with all my might. The bat connected with something solid, and I heard a sickening crunch. I looked up, expecting to see the zombie, but there was nothing there. Confused, I stepped outside, scanning the darkness with my flashlight. The woods were silent. the only sound my ragged breathing. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. I swung the flashlight around, but whatever it was had vanished into the trees. I stood there, trembling, feeling the weight of the night pressing down on me. I knew it was toying with me, wearing me down until I was too exhausted to fight back. I retreated inside, bolting the door behind me. The rest of the night passed in a blur of fear and paranoia. The scraping continued, relentless and maddening, but I couldn't muster the courage to confront it again. When dawn finally broke, the noise stopped, and I collapsed onto the couch, drained and defeated. I knew I couldn't stay here. The zombie was coming for me, and it was only a matter of time before it broke through my feeble defenses. I needed to find help, someone who could believe my story and offer some semblance of protection. But in this small town, who could I turn to? As I packed a bag with essentials, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat, every creak of the floorboards a sign of impending doom. I had to leave, and soon, before the night came again. I left the cabin just as the first rays of sunlight pierced through the canopy of trees, illuminating the path before me. The small town, usually so charming, now felt like a maze of potential horrors. Every friendly face seemed to mask a hidden threat, every familiar place a potential trap. My first stop was the local diner. It was always bustling in the morning, filled with the comforting aroma of fresh coffee and sizzling bacon. Today, however, it felt different. I could see the curiosity and suspicion in the eyes of the regulars as I walked in, my disheveled appearance and wild eyes drawing their attention. I made my way to the counter where Helen, the elderly waitress, gave me a concerned look. "You okay, hun?" she asked, pouring me a cup of coffee without waiting for my order. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. "Helen, have you ever heard of anything strange happening around here? Like really strange?" She frowned, setting the coffee pot down. "Strange how?" Like someone being chased by something at night. Something not human." Her expression shifted from concern to confusion, and then to a guarded wariness. "Are you feeling all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." "It's not a ghost," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "It's a zombie. It comes after me at night." Helen's eyes widened, but not with understanding, with fear. She leaned in closer, lowering her voice. "You shouldn't talk about such things. People around here don't take kindly to those kinds of stories." "But it's real," I insisted. "I've seen it. It's been outside my cabin for 2 nights now, trying to get in." She shook her head, glancing around nervously. "You need to be careful. This town has its secrets, and some things are better left alone." Before I could press her further, she hurried off to attend to another customer, leaving me with more questions than answers. I sipped my coffee, feeling a growing sense of isolation. If I couldn't find help here, where could I go? Desperation drove me to the town library. I figured if anyone knew about local legends or had knowledge about strange occurrences, it would be the librarian. The library was a quaint building, its walls lined with dusty books and faded posters. Mrs. Whitaker, the librarian, was a stern woman with a penchant for order and quiet. She eyed me suspiciously as I approached the desk. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone clipped. "I'm looking for information on local legends or strange happenings," I said, trying to sound as composed as possible. Her gaze softened slightly and she nodded. "We have a section on local history and folklore. Follow me." She led me to a dimly lit corner of the library, where shelves of old books and yellowed newspapers awaited. "This might be what you're looking for," she said, before leaving me to my search. I pored over the books and articles, hoping to find something, anything that could explain what was happening to me. Hours passed, and I was about to give up when I stumbled upon an old newspaper clipping. The headline read, "Mysterious Deaths Linked to Night Stalker." My heart raced as I read the article. It detailed a series of gruesome deaths that had occurred in the town over a century ago. The victims were found with their bodies mangled, their faces twisted in terror. Witnesses claimed to have seen a figure lurking in the woods at night, but no one had ever caught it. As I read on, a chill ran down my spine. The description of the figure matched what I had seen. Pale, rotting skin, glowing eyes, a grotesque grin. The article ended with a chilling note. "The Night Stalker is said to return every 100 years, seeking out new victims." I sat back, my mind reeling. The pieces were falling into place, but it didn't bring me any comfort. If the legend was true, the zombie wasn't just after me. It was part of a cycle of horror that had plagued the town for generations. I needed to get out of there before nightfall. But as I gathered my things and prepared to leave, I felt a cold draft and heard a whisper, almost imperceptible. "You can't escape." The whisper sent a shiver down my spine, and I spun around, expecting to see someone standing behind me. The library was empty, save for Mrs. Whitaker at the front desk, oblivious to the terror gnawing at my insides. I quickly gathered my things, trying to shake off the feeling of dread that had settled over me. As I stepped outside, the sun was already sinking low in the sky. Panic gripped me as I realized I had lost track of time. I needed to find somewhere safe before nightfall. But where? The cabin was no longer an option, and no one in town seemed willing to help. I decided to head to the town's only inn, a rustic building that had seen better days. It was run by Mr. Thompson, a gruff man with a no-nonsense attitude. I hoped he might have some insight or at least offer me a room for the night. The inn's lobby was dimly lit, the air thick with the smell of old wood and faint traces of mildew. Mr. Thompson stood behind the counter, cleaning a glass with a rag. He looked up as I entered, his expression unreadable. "Need a room?" he asked, his voice gruff. "Yes, please," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Just for the night?" He nodded and handed me a key without asking any questions. As I reached for it, our eyes met, and I saw a flicker of recognition, or was it fear, in his gaze. Before I could ask him anything, he turned away, busying himself with some paperwork. I made my way to the room, my footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. The room itself was small and sparsely furnished, but it felt like a sanctuary compared to the cabin. I locked the door, double-checked the windows, and collapsed onto the bed, my body exhausted but my mind racing. As darkness fell, the familiar fear crept in. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening for any sound that might indicate the zombie's presence. The hours dragged on, each tick of the clock amplifying my anxiety. Just as I was about to drift off, a loud bang echoed through the hallway, followed by heavy footsteps. I bolted upright, my heart pounding in my chest. The footsteps grew louder, closer, until they stopped right outside my door. I held my breath, gripping the edge of the bed, waiting for the inevitable. The door handle rattled, and I could hear a low, guttural growl on the other side. Summoning all my courage, I crept towards the door and peeked through the peephole. My blood ran cold. The zombie was standing there, its glowing eyes staring directly at me. I stumbled back, my mind racing. How had it found me? Was nowhere safe? The growling grew louder, more insistent as the zombie pounded on the door. The wood creaked and splintered under the force of its blows. I looked around the room, desperately searching for something to defend myself with. My eyes landed on an old rusted fireplace poker propped against the wall. I grabbed it, feeling its weight in my hands, and steeled myself for what was to come. The door burst open, and the zombie lunged at me, its decaying hands reaching out. I swung the poker with all my might, striking it across the face. It staggered back but quickly regained its footing, advancing on me with a snarl. The fight was brutal and chaotic. I swung the poker wildly, trying to keep the zombie at bay, but it was relentless. Its glowing eyes bored into mine, filling me with a primal fear. Just when I thought I couldn't fight any longer, I managed to land a blow that sent it crashing to the floor. I didn't wait to see if it would get back up. I bolted from the room, sprinting down the hallway and out into the night. The town was eerily quiet, the streets deserted. I had no plan, no destination, only the instinct to run. As I fled, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that the zombie was not the only thing hunting me. The town held dark secrets, and I was caught in the middle of a nightmare that I couldn't wake from. All I knew was that I had to keep moving, or I would become the next victim of the Night Stalker. I ran through the empty streets, my footsteps echoing off the cobblestones. Every shadow seemed to move. Every gust of wind carried a whisper of danger. My mind raced with questions, but there was no time to think, only time to run. I needed a place to hide, somewhere the zombie wouldn't find me. My thoughts drifted to the church at the edge of town. It was old, nearly abandoned, but it might offer some protection. I turned down a narrow alley, the church's steeple guiding me like a beacon in the night. When I reached the church, the large wooden doors creaked open with a groan. Inside, the air was cold and musty, the faint scent of incense lingering. The pews were empty, the altar draped in shadows. I hurried down the aisle, searching for a place to conceal myself. I found a small door near the back, leading to a storage room. It was cramped and filled with dusty old relics, but it felt safer than being out in the open. I closed the door behind me, sinking to the floor with a sigh of relief. For a moment, I allowed myself to believe I was safe. But the silence was short-lived. A low, guttural growl echoed through the church, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps. My heart leaped into my throat as I realized the zombie had followed me. I held my breath, praying it wouldn't find me. The footsteps grew louder, closer, until they stopped just outside the storage room door. I could hear the zombie's labored breathing, its rotting stench seeping through the cracks. The door rattled as it tried the handle, but it was locked. I closed my eyes, hoping it would move on. Instead, the zombie began to pound on the door, each blow sending vibrations through the room. The wood splintered and cracked, and I knew it was only a matter of time before it broke through. I looked around, desperate for a way out, but there was none. Summoning every ounce of courage, I prepared to face the monster once again. I grabbed an old candelabrum, its iron frame heavy and cold in my hands. The door finally gave way, and the zombie lurched into the room, its eyes glowing with malevolent intent. I swung the candelabrum, striking it across the head. The impact sent it staggering, but it quickly recovered, its decaying hands reaching for me. I fought with everything I had, each blow fueled by fear and desperation. The zombie was strong, but I was determined. Just as it seemed I would be overpowered, the sound of footsteps echoed through the church. Human footsteps. The zombie hesitated, and in that moment, a figure appeared in the doorway, holding a shotgun. "Get down!" the stranger shouted. I dropped to the floor as the shotgun roared, the blast tearing into the zombie. It let out a hideous screech, its body convulsing before collapsing in a heap. The stranger stepped forward, pumping another round into the chamber, and fired again. The zombie lay still, its glowing eyes finally dimmed. I looked up, trembling, as the stranger helped me to my feet. He was a rugged man with a weathered face and eyes that had seen too much. "You okay?" he asked, his voice rough but kind. I nodded, too shaken to speak. He glanced at the zombie, then back at me. "We've got to get out of here before more of them show up." "More?" I managed to ask, my voice barely a whisper. He nodded grimly. "This town has a history, and it's not a good one. Come on, let's get you somewhere safe." I followed him out of the church, my mind reeling. Who was this man? How did he know about the zombies? As we made our way through the dark streets, he explained, "My name's Ethan. I've been tracking these things for years. They show up every century like clockwork, hunting whoever they can find. I don't know why, but I do know how to fight them." "Why didn't anyone in town warn me?" I asked, frustration and fear mingling in my voice. "Because most people don't believe," Ethan said. "And those who do are too scared to talk. But you saw it. You know the truth. And now we have to find a way to stop it before it kills again." As we reached the edge of town, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe with Ethan's help, I could survive this nightmare. But deep down, I knew the fight was far from over. The night was still young, and the zombies were out there, waiting. We reached Ethan's truck, a beat-up old pickup parked at the edge of town. The engine roared to life, and we sped away from the church, the dark silhouette of the town disappearing behind us. The headlights cut through the night, illuminating the winding road ahead. "Where are we going?" I asked, my voice trembling. "To my cabin," Ethan replied. "It's in a secluded spot, away from the town. We'll be safe there, at least for a while." The drive was tense, silence punctuated by the occasional hoot of an owl or the rustling of leaves. I glanced at Ethan, his face illuminated by the dim glow of the dashboard. He seemed calm, but I could see the strain in his eyes. "How did you know about the zombies?" I asked, breaking the silence. Ethan sighed, keeping his eyes on the road. "My family has been dealing with these things for generations. My great-grandfather was one of the first to encounter them, back in the early 1900s. He kept journals, detailed accounts of what he saw and how he fought them. Those journals have been passed down, along with the responsibility to protect the town." "Why didn't you warn people?" I asked, frustration creeping into my voice. "Because most people don't believe," Ethan said, echoing his earlier words. "And those who do, well, they either leave or end up dead. It's a curse, this town. We can't escape it, only survive it. The weight of his words settled over me, a heavy blanket of fear and inevitability. I stared out the window, my mind racing. How had I ended up here, in the midst of this nightmare? And how was I supposed to survive it? Ethan's cabin was a small, sturdy structure nestled deep in the woods. It was well stocked and fortified, with heavy wooden shutters and reinforced doors. We quickly secured the cabin, barring the windows and setting up makeshift alarms around the perimeter. Inside, Ethan spread out an array of weapons on the kitchen table: guns, knives, and even a crossbow. "We need to be ready for anything," he said, his voice steady. "These things are relentless, and they won't stop until they've got what they want." "What do they want?" I asked, a chill running down my spine. "To feed," Ethan replied grimly, "and to spread their curse. If they catch you, they don't just kill you, they turn you into one of them." I shuddered, the reality of the situation sinking in. We were fighting not just for our lives, but for our very humanity. Ethan handed me a knife and a small handgun. "Keep these on you at all times," he instructed. "And stay close. If anything happens, we need to be able to defend ourselves." I nodded, feeling a strange mix of fear and determination. I wasn't a fighter, but I had no choice. If I wanted to survive, I had to be strong. As the night wore on, Ethan and I took turns keeping watch. The hours passed in a tense silence, broken only by the occasional hoot of an owl or the rustle of leaves outside. My mind kept drifting back to the zombie, its glowing eyes and grotesque grin haunting me. Just before dawn, a loud crash shattered the silence. Ethan and I sprang to our feet, weapons at the ready. The alarms we had set up around the cabin were going off, a cacophony of noise that sent my heart racing. "They're here," Ethan said, his voice grim. "Get ready." We moved to the front of the cabin, peering out through the reinforced shutters. The first light of dawn was creeping over the horizon, casting long shadows across the clearing. And in those shadows, I saw them, figures moving towards the cabin, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light. "Remember what I told you," Ethan said, his voice steady. "Aim for the head. It's the only way to take them down." I nodded, gripping the handgun tightly. The zombies were getting closer, their movements slow but determined. My breath came in short, shallow gasps, my heart pounding in my chest. This was it, the moment of truth. The first zombie reached the cabin, its decaying hands clawing at the door. I took aim, my hands trembling, and fired. The shot rang out, hitting the zombie square in the head. It collapsed to the ground, but there were more coming, too many to count. Ethan and I fought side by side, our weapons flashing in the dim light. The zombies were relentless, their numbers overwhelming. We were holding our ground, but I could feel my strength waning, my resolve weakening. As the first rays of sunlight broke through the trees, the zombies began to retreat, their glowing eyes dimming. We watched in silence as they disappeared into the forest, leaving behind a scene of carnage and destruction. "We made it," Ethan said, his voice filled with a mix of relief and exhaustion. "But this isn't over. They'll be back, and we need to be ready." I nodded, my body trembling with exhaustion and fear. We had survived the night, but I knew the battle was far from over. The zombies were out there waiting, and we had to find a way to stop them before they stopped us. As dawn broke, Ethan and I collapsed onto the cabin floor, our bodies aching from the night's battle. The sense of temporary relief was palpable, but we knew it was fleeting. We had won the night, but the war was far from over. "We need to find out more," Ethan said, wiping sweat from his brow. "There's got to be something in my great-grandfather's journals that can help us. Maybe there's a way to break the curse." We spent the morning poring over the old journals, the pages yellowed with age and filled with spidery handwriting. The entries detailed past encounters with the zombies, their habits, and their weaknesses. But there was one entry that caught my eye, one that seemed different from the rest. It was dated over a century ago, and it spoke of a ritual, an ancient, forbidden ceremony that could banish the zombies for good. The details were vague, the instructions cryptic, but it was our only hope. "Do you think this will work?" I asked, my voice tinged with desperation. Ethan shrugged, his eyes scanning the pages. "It's our best shot. We need to gather the items listed here and perform the ritual. But it won't be easy. Some of these things are rare, and we don't have much time." The list included items like a silver dagger, a sprig of nightshade, and a vial of holy water. Some of the items were easy enough to find, but others would require a bit of luck and a lot of courage. We decided to split up to cover more ground. Ethan would search the surrounding woods for the nightshade, while I would head back to town to gather the remaining items. We agreed to meet back at the cabin before nightfall. As I made my way into town, the eerie quietness of the streets unnerved me. The townspeople were going about their daily lives, oblivious to the horrors lurking in the night. I wondered how many of them knew the truth, how many were living in fear but too scared to speak out. My first stop was the general store. Old Mr. Harris, the shopkeeper, greeted me with a nod. "What can I do for you today?" he asked, his tone as friendly as ever. "I'm looking for a silver dagger," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Mr. Harris raised an eyebrow. "A silver dagger? That's an unusual request." "It's for a historical reenactment," I lied, hoping he wouldn't press the issue. To my relief, he nodded and disappeared into the back room. He returned a few minutes later with a small, ornate dagger. "This is the best I have. It's old, but it should do the trick." I thanked him and paid for the dagger, feeling a small sense of accomplishment. Next, I headed to the local apothecary, a tiny shop filled with herbs and potions. Mrs. Carmichael, the owner, was a stern woman with a keen eye. "I need some nightshade and a vial of holy water," I said, trying to sound casual. Mrs. Carmichael's eyes narrowed. "Nightshade is dangerous. What do you need it for?" I hesitated, then decided to come clean. "It's to stop the zombies. They're back, and we need to perform a ritual to banish them." To my surprise, Mrs. Carmichael didn't seem shocked. She nodded slowly as if she'd been expecting this. "I've heard the stories," she said quietly. "Wait here." She returned with a small sprig of nightshade and a vial of holy water. "Be careful," she warned. "The nightshade is poisonous and the holy water is sacred. Use them wisely." I thanked her and hurried back to the cabin, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and hope. Ethan was already there, waiting for me with a bundle of nightshade in hand. "Got everything?" he asked. I nodded, showing him the items I'd gathered. "Let's do this." We followed the instructions in the journal, setting up a makeshift altar in the center of the cabin. The ritual required precise timing and careful execution. As we worked, the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the room. "We have to be quick," Ethan said, his voice tense. "They'll be back soon." We arranged the items on the altar and began the incantation, our voices blending in a low, rhythmic chant. The air grew heavy, charged with a strange energy. Just as we finished the final words, a loud crash echoed through the cabin. The zombies had returned, more determined than ever. They clawed at the doors and windows, their eyes glowing with a malevolent light. We stood our ground, weapons at the ready, as the ritual's power began to take hold. A blinding light filled the cabin, and the zombies let out a collective screech. One by one, they began to disintegrate, their bodies turning to ash. The light grew brighter, enveloping the entire room, until there was nothing left but silence. When the light finally faded, the zombies were gone. The cabin was still, the air clear. We had done it. We had broken the curse. Ethan and I stood there, breathing heavily, the weight of what we'd accomplished sinking in. "We did it," I whispered, my voice filled with awe. Ethan nodded, a rare smile crossing his face. "Yeah, we did." But as we surveyed the aftermath, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching us, lurking in the shadows. The curse might be broken, but the town's dark history would always remain. We had won the battle, but the war was far from over. And deep down, I knew that the true horror was yet to come. The next few days were eerily calm. The townspeople went about their lives, blissfully unaware of the battle that had taken place. Ethan and I stayed vigilant, but there were no signs of the zombies. It seemed as though we had truly succeeded in banishing them, but the peace was short-lived. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, a chill crept into the air. Ethan and I were sitting in the cabin discussing our next steps when we heard it. A distant, bone-chilling howl. It was unlike anything we had heard before, a sound that seemed to pierce the very fabric of reality. Ethan's face went pale. "That can't be," he muttered, grabbing his shotgun. I followed him outside, my heart pounding. The howl echoed through the trees, closer now, We scanned the tree line, but there was nothing, just darkness and the unsettling quiet of the forest at night. "What was that?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I don't know," Ethan replied, his eyes fixed on the woods, "but it can't be good." As the night wore on, the howling grew louder, more insistent. It seemed to come from all directions, surrounding us. The air grew thick with an oppressive energy, the same energy we had felt during the ritual. "We need to get out of here," Ethan said, urgency in his voice. "Something's coming, and I don't think it's the zombies." We packed our things quickly, loading them into Ethan's truck. Just as we were about to leave, a figure emerged from the woods. It was humanoid, but not quite right. Its movements were jerky, its form distorted. As it stepped into the light, I realized with horror that it was not one figure, but many, melded together into a grotesque mass. The creature let out another howl, and the ground beneath us trembled. Ethan and I exchanged a terrified glance before jumping into the truck and speeding away. As we drove, the creature gave chase, its howls growing fainter as we put distance between us and it. "What was that thing?" I asked, my voice shaking. Ethan's grip on the wheel tightened. "I don't know, but it's not like anything I've ever seen. It must be connected to the curse somehow." We drove through the night, heading for the nearest city. The creature didn't follow us, but the sense of unease lingered. We checked into a motel on the outskirts of town, both of us too exhausted to think straight. As I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the image of the creature from my mind. Its distorted form, its haunting howls. It was as if the nightmare had taken on a new, even more terrifying shape. The next morning, we contacted a local historian, hoping to find more information about the curse and the creature. Dr. Matthews was an elderly man with a wealth of knowledge about the town's history. He listened intently as we recounted our experiences, his expression growing more serious by the minute. "It sounds like you've encountered a wraith," he said finally. "A powerful, malevolent spirit formed from the souls of the cursed. It's possible that the ritual you performed weakened the curse but didn't destroy it entirely. The wraith could be the embodiment of the curse's residual energy." "How do we stop it?" I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. Dr. Matthews leaned back, his eyes thoughtful. "Wraiths are incredibly difficult to destroy. They feed on fear and despair, growing stronger with each victim. The only way to truly banish it is to confront it directly, to face your fears and sever its connection to the physical world." Ethan and I exchanged a grim look. We had faced zombies, but this was something else entirely. A creature born of pure malice, feeding on our deepest fears. It seemed impossible. "We have to try," Ethan said, determination in his voice. "We can't let this thing continue to terrorize the town." Dr. Matthews nodded, handing us a small leather-bound book. "This contains rituals and incantations that might help. But be warned, confronting a wraith is dangerous. You must be prepared for anything." Armed with the book and a renewed sense of purpose, we returned to the cabin. The air was thick with tension, the forest eerily silent. We set up a circle of protection using the rituals from the book, lighting candles and chanting incantations. As night fell, the howling began once more. The wraith emerged from the woods, its form shifting and writhing. We stood our ground, reciting the incantations, our voices steady despite the fear that gripped us. The wraith circled us, its howls filling the night air. It seemed to grow stronger, feeding on our fear. But we held firm, drawing on every ounce of courage. The candles flickered, the air crackling with energy. Then, with a final deafening howl, the wraith lunged at us. Ethan and I raised our voices, the incantations reaching a fever pitch. There was a blinding flash of light, and the wraith let out a hideous screech, its form disintegrating before our eyes. When the light faded, the wraith was gone. The forest was silent once more, the oppressive energy lifted. We had done it. We had faced our fears and banished the wraith. Exhausted but relieved, we collapsed onto the cabin floor. The curse was broken, the nightmare finally over. But the experience had changed us, leaving us with scars that would never fully heal. As we sat in the quiet of the cabin, I realized that the true horror wasn't the zombies or the wraith. It was the darkness within ourselves, the fear and despair that had threatened to consume us. And in facing that darkness, we had found the strength to survive. The next few days were surreal. The town was quiet, the air no longer heavy with the sense of impending doom. Ethan and I tried to resume some semblance of normalcy, but the events of the past weeks had left an indelible mark on us. The wraith was gone, but the memories lingered. We spent our time repairing the cabin and cleaning up the remnants of our battle. There was a sense of peace, but it was fragile, like a thin veneer over a deep chasm. We both knew that while the immediate threat had been dealt with, the town's dark history was far from over. One afternoon, as we were sorting through the journals and relics left by Ethan's great-grandfather, we stumbled upon something curious, an old map tucked between the pages of a particularly worn journal. It was hand-drawn, depicting the town as it had been over a century ago. There were markings and annotations, and one in particular caught our attention, a symbol resembling the wraith, marked at the center of the town. "This looks important," Ethan said, tracing the lines with his finger. "Maybe it can tell us more about the curse." We decided to investigate, following the map's directions to a forgotten part of the town. The streets were narrow, lined with dilapidated buildings that seemed to whisper of forgotten stories. At the center of this area, we found an old, abandoned house, its windows boarded up and its paint peeling away. "This must be it," I said, feeling a chill run down my spine. Ethan nodded, pushing the door open with a creak. Inside, the air was stale and thick with dust. We moved through the house carefully, our flashlights casting eerie shadows on the walls. It was clear that no one had been here in decades. In the basement, we found what we were looking for. An old iron-bound chest sat in the corner, its lock rusted and fragile. Ethan pried it open, revealing a trove of ancient artifacts and scrolls. Among them was a leather-bound book, its cover marked with the same symbol from the map. "This must be it," Ethan said, carefully opening the book. The pages were filled with more detailed accounts of the curse, going back generations. It spoke of a pact made long ago, a deal struck with dark forces that had brought prosperity to the town at a terrible cost. The zombies, the wraith, they were all part of this curse, a punishment for the town's sins. But there was more. The book also contained a prophecy, one that spoke of a way to end the curse for good. It required a sacrifice, a willing soul to face the darkness and offer their life to break the pact. Ethan and I exchanged a look, the weight of the revelation settling over us. "We have to do this," he said quietly. "We have to end it, once and for all." "But who will make the sacrifice?" I asked, my voice trembling. Ethan looked at me, his eyes filled with determination. "I will. This is my family's legacy, my responsibility." I shook my head, tears welling up. "There has to be another way." "There isn't," he said gently. "I've known this was my fate for a long time. It's why I stayed, why I fought, to protect the town, to end the curse." We prepared for the ritual, gathering the necessary items and following the instructions in the book. As the night fell, we returned to the cabin one last time. The air was still, the forest quiet. We set up the altar and began the incantations, our voices blending in a somber chant. As the final words were spoken, a deep rumble shook the ground. A figure appeared in the center of the circle, a dark, menacing presence. It was the embodiment of the curse, the darkness that had plagued the town for so long. Ethan stepped forward, his face calm. "I offer my life to end this curse," he said, his voice steady. The dark figure seemed to consider him for a moment, then reached out, enveloping him in shadow. There was a blinding flash of light, and Ethan was gone. The figure dissipated, the air clearing, the oppressive energy lifting. I fell to my knees, tears streaming down my face. The curse was broken, but at a terrible cost. Ethan had given his life to save the town, to end the nightmare. I stayed at the cabin for a while, processing what had happened, mourning the loss of a friend and a hero. Eventually, I returned to the town, carrying with me the knowledge of what had transpired. I told the townspeople the truth, and slowly they began to understand the sacrifices that had been made for their safety. The town started to heal, the dark history giving way to a brighter future. As for me, I kept Ethan's journals and the Book of Prophecies, vowing to protect them and to remember the courage and sacrifice that had ended the curse. The town was free, but the memory of those dark days would live on, a reminder of the power of bravery and the cost of redemption. And so the nightmare ended, but the lessons learned would never be forgotten. The true horror wasn't just the monsters we faced, but the darkness within ourselves and the light that can overcome it.